Good afternoon to your last session of the day and last session of our conference for the year. I'm Jennifer Pinnock, and I am a Western Region Director for ACAT, and I am here to introduce our next speaker. She will be speaking on strengthening officer safety, and I would like to introduce Chief Sylvia Moyer. She's a California native and has over 3 decades of local police practice with over 1 decade as a chief of police. To learn more about her career and her accomplishments, please check out her bio under the speakers tab. Today, she will be talking to us about strengthening officer safety. Welcome, Chief Moyer.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and hello, everybody. At the end of your day in Tennessee, it's just after lunch here in California. I'm delighted to be here with you. So everywhere we look, someone's talking about resilience, this thing about resilience and mindfulness. We have recognized in public service, those of us in policing, wherever we serve, that there's a lot of pressure out there. And we're seeing some examples where folks are not responding to that pressure really well. So resilience and mindfulness, it sounds great, but what the heck is it? Why does it matter in the animal care world, and how the heck do we practice it? So in our time together, our brief time together, we will confront the difficulty of the reality of the animal control, animal care world, provide some insights as to neuroscience and when fear and stress are encountered. I encourage you to figure out what little nuggets you could take from our time together to influence how you show up wherever you serve, whether it's in a shelter, in the field, wherever it is. There's something in our time together that will likely nudge you toward a different experience. It may just be the thing that builds your resilience. It may be the thing that nudges you toward greater officer safety, officer wellness. And when I say officer, I include all of us that are in public service, and we are encountering people that are in crisis quite often, right? The practices, we'll also explore some practices that will influence the response to fear and stress. We're going to explore some of that, and you might just be exposed to some of the benefits of meditation, mindfulness. Compassion is not only good for you and the greater profession that you're in, but it might just be an exposure to a practice that you engage in throughout your life. So we're not going to be burning incense. We're not going to have some hippy-dippy kind of journey, but we're going to face some of the grim realities in professions where we encounter a lot of suffering. We encounter trauma. We encounter people in high emotion, and quite often it puts us in conflict with people. So I am here carving out time with you to nudge you toward an exposure, perhaps an idea, and maybe some energy and influence around pursuing something that might just influence you. So we talked about it, and we said, hey, I'd ask you if you have questions, let's hold them till the end. Recognizing it's the end of your day, there's going to be plenty of time, and we're going to get through this in a way that respects and values you. So we're going to talk about how we might just influence our human response, our tactical response, and some of the officer safety or human safety stuff that is necessary in the work that we do. So you got to know, first of all, looking at this uniform, which, my last day in uniform is going to be Friday. So it's going to be a transition time, right? I'm not an expert in this arena. I am merely a participant, a student, a witness, a failure, a success, a champion, an advocate, and a cynic about all of this stuff. And I rely on what I've experienced, what I've learned, what I've studied. So if in any way this intrigues you, find out more and do it for yourself, not because someone told you to do it, but because it's right for you. So let's dive in. I have to start with Viktor Frankl. In 2001, I signed up for a sergeant's class here in California. It's an 8-month sergeant school called the Supervisory Leadership Institute. And here I was going into this cohort of 24 students, sergeants from across the state of California, to explore leadership. And I opened this box of all the books that we received. And the first book I saw was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I immediately thought, what? Excuse me. I'm reading a book about a man who survived a concentration camp, and I didn't understand it, but it suddenly became very clear. And as Viktor Frankl offered his story about how he survived in a concentration camp, it really changed the course of my life. Viktor Frankl offered this statement. He said, between stimulus and response lies choice. Between stimulus and response lies choice. And in this choice, in this space between stimulus and response, is our freedom to respond rather than to react. And that was a pivotal lesson for me. It began a consciousness as to how I interact with the world, and it served as central to my practice and my growth. It also really nudged me into this practice and growth and learning, and I had to learn about neuroscience. So let's talk about this neuroscience thing, the brain that all of us have. We all want to be good at what we do. And peak performance is described by police trainer Michael Malpass as being possible when our cognitive system and our emotions are in balance. And he says that we can develop this balance, this mindset, as a product of a skill set of training that we're going to lightly touch on today, that we can experience with decisions made before the stimulus starts. And what's the stimulus? Where we are. Sometimes it's violence, it's attack, it's someone full of rage in a shelter or in the field or wherever we serve. It's also performance under pressure, and it's through mindset that animal care officers, all of us really, can gain situational and self-awareness to avoid overreacting, or even what we call this amygdala hijack. I say, what? I'm a public school system product. I'm a product of the public school system. And so I'm not a neuroscientist. I know lightly about the amygdala. Here's what I know. What is our amygdala? So we know that the great warriors and thinkers have understood that those who survive encounters, they balance reason and emotion. And we've all seen, if we can reflect, we've all seen someone lose their stuff, lose their minds, as we say. And science has affirmed that what we believed is that the brain is a split processing center. So let's explore that for a second. The amygdala is the part of the brain whose role it is to interpret incoming data. It's all of that stimulus that's out there for us. It maps emotional memories and drives us toward reward and away from excessive risk. So our amygdala is that place where we have the memories and it keeps us from harm. It does it by creating what is described as emotional memories that are prioritized for future use. Malpass helped me understand this because he told this story, the analogy of the chariot and the horses on the chariot named reason and emotion. And he said that the ancient Greeks understood this as the conscious you, the driving the chariot, and one horse represents emotions trying to pull us toward one side of the road. The split brain, the other side, emotions is the one pulling us to one side of the road, and reason is pulling us toward the other side of the road. Our responsibility is to maintain firm control of the two horses. I hope you like the horse analogy here. The two horses tugging at the reins and stay balanced on this road, the center, the path forward. So it's that part of the brain, the amygdala, that controls that imprints that. And an amygdala hijack is when we are excessively overcome and leave the roadway. Maybe you have experienced this in an emotional interaction with somebody, or you've seen somebody respond to this in a way where you can tell they've been overcome by emotion. They're pulled to one side of the road. We can train to balance that. And that's one of the things I'm offering for you today is how do we cultivate a practice where we can have that balance? So one of those practices is mindfulness. To cultivate mindfulness, often through meditation. Now, everybody in Tennessee, I hope you look west, and you don't think everybody in California is a granola eating hippy-dippy. I'm going to take a dive into some meditative practices here with you. So mindfulness incorporates the qualities of curiosity, acceptance, non-judgment, and compassion. So when people talk about mindfulness, they're talking about curiosity. They're talking about acceptance, about non-judgment, about compassion. And quite often, the judgment that we have, and I really hope you hear this, the judgment that we have is of ourselves. A practice to explore cultivating mindfulness is meditation. Now, how do we do that? Well, you could take a class, you could read a book, you can get an app. I happen to use Headspace and 10% Happier. Headspace, Andy Petticombe started Headspace when he left a Buddhist monastery, and he started bringing the Eastern philosophy of meditation into Western culture and normalizing it, and really bringing in the neuroscience to understand how a meditative practice can build mindfulness, can get us to hold those two horses, emotion and reason, toward the center of the road, that can potentially help us expand our field of view and to have balance. So I use Headspace quite a bit as a practice. I also have dipped into 10% Happier. So how did 10% Happier start? A guy named Dan Harris. You might see him on weekends on Good Morning America. He's an anchor on Good Morning America. He described this thing. He told the story of a time when he was on air and had a complete anxiety attack. And in that total meltdown, he started exploring how his amygdala was hijacked. He was completely overcome with fear and emotion. And he began exploring meditation. When you look at 10% Happier, if you dive into that book or the app, you'll see that he came out to Tempe, Arizona Police Department to explore what we were doing in Tempe. And what we were doing was we were normalizing meditation as a pathway for officer safety, officer resilience, and overall health and wellness of our employees. So I encourage you to check that one out. There are guided meditations in both that will build your skill at recognizing what's coming up for you emotionally with all the stimulus that's in your world, personally and professionally, broadly using breathing and awareness. Even the Navy SEALs use 4x4x4 breathing. And I invite you right now in this part of our time together to engage in the short practice. So you ready? If you're driving, I don't encourage you to totally do this. So if you're in a safe place, I encourage you to do this with me. So this is what the Navy SEALs do. It's what everyone in practice does. So if you're in a safe space, try this. Just find yourself in a comfortable place. You don't have to be on the ground, sitting cross-legged. Those of us that are orthopedically challenged couldn't do that anyway. But let's try this brief practice. As you sit in this safe place with your feet on the ground, I invite you to take a deep breath in, breathing in for a count of 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. Find a place where you can gaze, comfortably gaze in a soft way, or you can close your eyes if you want to, and breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. And as your breath returns to normal, Notice if you feel differently. Notice perhaps a different state for you. We encourage breathing and breath because it interrupts the overstimulus of emotion and it creates balance for broader situational awareness. We can't control emotion, but we can train to regulate it so we survive, thrive, and build our resilience. So at this point, there's a high risk that you think I'm a total whack. There's a high risk. But how might this serve you in your animal care and control work? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story. So I arrived after 20 years in policing. I retired in California and I went to Arizona and I joined the Tempe Police Department in Arizona as the chief of police. And when I arrived, I encountered an environment that was professional. People were open to change. And yet there were some people that were super struggling. So we began exploring how meditation, mindfulness, and resilience work might just add to officer safety, add to officer health and wellness. And when I say officer, I should say employee, because our professional staff and our sworn staff began some of the practices. So I asked two of our folks to go to mindfulbadge.com to Richard Gearling's work up in Bend, Oregon. And they went to a retreat. And I told them, I said, hey, what if I told you that there was a practice, there were practices based on science, based in the warrior work in the military, based in some of Eastern thought that might just increase your consciousness, your situational awareness in the tactical environment, and might just help you deal with, help you address the acute, chronic, and cumulative toxicity, suffering, anger, trauma in the work that we do. Who would say no to that? So they said, sure, Chief, well, I'll go. So I asked them to go. And they went through a course of study up in Oregon that taught many of the skills of resilience, mindfulness for officer safety, for life safety. And they were the critics, they were the cynics. And one of the officers came back and he said, I thought, Chief, you were totally nuts to send us up there and do meditation, but I get it. I get that I'm too quick to react in a tactical environment. And that because my emotion, my amygdala is being overrun and out of balance, I might be too quick to react and I might not be taking in the entire bit of data out in the environment where I serve. And I said, continue the practice. And he came back to me one day and he said, Chief, I've got to tell you the story. He said, I got dispatched a few days ago to a call for service of a man with a gun. And I knew on my way to that call, I needed to do my practice of breathing, of intention and purpose that I've learned so that I could take in all of the data in the environment and let that experience, let that call for service unfold so I could make the safest, most tactically sound response to this call for service. He said, I responded. I had a description of a man with a gun. I approached. I had seen things in the environment that I didn't think that I would have seen but for this practice. I came up, I drew my firearm, I pointed at the guy. The guy had his hands in his waistband. He was practicing actively the practices that he had begun doing through mindfulness. And he said he saw the man's hands coming up and the man's hand came out. He let the situation unfold. The man did not have a gun and he took him into custody. Now, it's not as emotional as he told it to me, but what he said to me was, before the mere presence. Actually, you know what? I think he told me the guy had a gun. He had a gun and the guy dropped the gun. So he came up and he dropped the gun. And this is what the officer told me in this story. He said, before I would have reacted much sooner. This, I knew he was trying to discard the gun. He discarded it. He did not make an attempt to use it against me. And the officer said that had this been before the mindfulness practice, he would have reacted and he likely would have shot that guy a lot sooner, or he would have shot him. He didn't fire his weapon in this instance. So what this officer relayed to me was the practice of being fully present, of breathing, of letting the events unfold, of holding on to the reins of this chariot, imprinted with the new practice, with breath, got him to a place and a space. He was presented with a stimulus. He was tactically sound and prepared. He let the events unfold, and he responded in a way that enhanced his safety, and he did not have to use deadly force. Equally, he said that he has done a lot of work. I just talked to him last week. He's done a lot of work in this space about how his practice is continuing, how it's expanding into other areas of his life, and how he's showing up differently as a spouse and as a dad. And that's his story. I can tell you that's the story of a lot of folks. His story, like a lot of officers are reporting, is that it makes them more aware of what is in front of them in the environment. Equally, folks are saying that the practices of mindfulness is generating compassion for them. And I ask them, what is this like? What does that mean for you? And they recognize that compassion means a sense of concern that arises when we're confronted with another person's suffering. And we feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. This is not a call to action for empathy where we feel the pain and the suffering of others, because I can't imagine what that would be like if all of us owned the pain and suffering of other people. With all of the pain, suffering, and trauma that you encounter in your space, in your work, it would be overwhelming. So I encourage you to understand the difference, to consider that the mindfulness practice, meditative practice, may just build compassion for yourself and for those that you're engaged with. So here's the deal. We've talked a little bit about this. We've talked about how we can incorporate mindfulness skills into the rhythms of our leadership. We talked about it lightly, and I could tell you that my practice, even today before joining you here, has been about taking a few moments prior to having an encounter with an employee that I had to give an oral reprimand to. Now, that's not in the tactical environment, but it is a difficult and emotional engagement with another human being. And so for me, what I did, and I encourage as a potential for you, is I just took 2 minutes prior to that engagement with the employee that I knew was going to be super energized around our interaction. And I did some 4x4 breathing. And I did an intentional compassion cultivation exercise where I just focused and I breathed. And I repeated the mantra of cultivate compassion for the suffering of another. It sounds hippy-dippy, but I could tell you that I was able to hold an employee accountable, to engage in a courageous conversation and have an open heart for his suffering. And this was just 2 hours ago. And it didn't destroy me because I wasn't owning his emotions. Just an offer. And it's an offer because the work you do is emotionally charged. It's often dangerous. And there are people in various states of emotion that you engage with throughout your work. So I incorporate it in the rhythms of my leadership, in the rhythms of my management, and officers are finding, and field folks are finding, that they're incorporating it into operations. Now, how are they doing that? If you're in the field, perhaps you could do it between calls for service. Many folks have found great strength in doing a reset between one call for service and another. So what does a reset look like? A reset might just be a set of 4x4 breathing. Can't close your eyes in the field, that would be weird. But you can do it between engagements to reset so that you approach that next tactical environment, that next operational environment, that next emotional environment with a different set of skills. Equally, you can build this into the leadership rhythms, your life rhythms, so that you do a reset before you come home. A lot of folks, we have really high charge days, and we end up bringing those home with us. Officers that I've engaged with and encouraged this practice have said that the most powerful piece for them, beyond the situational awareness and tactical environment, so they're safer, is that they do a reset before they walk in the door at home. Acute, chronic, and cumulative toxicity and suffering is sticky. And they're reporting that through their practice of reset and a brief mindfulness breathing practice, they enter their home differently than they used to, and their families are noticing. It's a thought. So the skills of incorporating mindfulness into the rhythms of our life, the rhythms of our day, is intentional, but it also builds our capacity for the skills in humanity that support the complex and difficult work of animal care. I can think of no deeper connection between sworn officers and another group than animal care, and perhaps some of the medical folks, where the connections, the consequences, the depth and breadth of suffering, struggle, and trauma are more real. And that's why I think it's appropriate that we're talking about this. And we're talking about this as colleagues in this greater service that we have. So these skills support our ability to lead forward an evolution of service alongside folks in service professions like ours, where there's a lot of emotion. So integrating mindfulness skills training into our leadership vision, into our life vision, into our commitment for ourselves, facilitates the necessary transformation of infusing kind of a new capacity, a new permission for our own health, for the health of our service, for the humanity, and for our overall performance. So as we end the kind of end of our time together, before any questions that you have, I want to bring up this idea of equanimity. Now, it was new to me. It basically offers, we frame an ethos of service to others in this way. We say a state of stability and composure enhanced through curiosity, non-judgment, and wise discernment that is undisturbed by exposure to chaos. My hunch is there's as much chaos in your field as there is in mine. So if it's a state of stability and composure, enhanced through curiosity, non-judgment of self and others, and wise discernment that is undisturbed by chaos, if there are practices that we can engage in that strengthen that, then we're well served. It's characterized by a practice of awareness and compassion, seeing and hearing others sense making with clarity, acting with humanity, and skillful right action. So we've explored a lot, and this has been a high-speed 30 minutes together. We talked about the neuroscience, how breathing interrupts, how we can train our two-sided brain, our cognitive systems, our reason and emotion. We can train that and influence it so we can more closely regulate our emotions and keep us on the path that through breathing, through mindfulness, meditation, cultivating compassion, it might just keep us safe in a tactical environment. The US Navy SEALs are showing it. SWAT teams are showing it. Police officers broadly in the tactical environment, or those of us that are at threat of being attacked in the field, are saying that it is aiding them. They're making better decisions. And on the backside, if it is keeping us healthier and more resilient as we engage with people through suffering and trauma, then whatever practice you might just begin to explore, make it real to you and cut yourself a break. There's no right and perfect way to do it. And it is a practice. It's called a practice because it is continual and ongoing. So they've shown to provide better emotional attention, widen our situational awareness, and serve us tactically to enhance our resilience, our health, generally show those around us a strengthened way of working and living. And I have to say that you deserve it. Your work is tough. And I have been delighted to spend a couple minutes kind of nudging you into maybe an idea, giving you permission to seek, to find. And we are better served because of the work that you do in the field that you serve. And it's been a delight to spend some time with you. So I would ask if you have any questions at all. There is nothing off the table. So if you want to write it in the chat, Jennifer and Jamie and I are going to kind of try to manage those. Or if you want to unmute, call me out, ask me anything you want. There's nothing off the table. So the floor is yours, anybody. So we have a couple in the chat. Thanks, Cheryl Ann. Appreciate that. So Cheryl Ann, Jennifer, you're muted. Cheryl Ann.
Now I'm not.
Now you're not. So
Yay, now
Cheryl Ann asked about the training. Great place to go is mindfulbadge.com. Mindfulbadge.com is led by Richard Gerling. He's a retired commander from the Coast Guard. He's also a lieutenant, retired lieutenant from the Hillsborough, Oregon Police Department. He's the one that really I started, I don't want to say stalking because that would be weird, but I began pursuing to learn more. Richard teaches this. I brought him to Napa recently where I'm serving, and we had a 2-day retreat. He teaches all over. And the lessons that he teaches, the practices that he encourages, it's not just for policing, it's for all of us that are in these highly consequential, high stakes environments. So I will type this in the chat. Mindfulbadge.com is a good one. And I'd encourage you to seek that. And Cheryl
she asked if you are part of the IAWP, International Association for Women Police.
Probably should be. So I've done a lot of work with International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum. I'm part of the 30 by 30 initiative that was launched recently that offers that there's a lot of research that shows that more women in police service has some different outcomes, some strengthened outcomes for victims and for It's advocating for, not at the exclusion of our incredible men that serve in policing, but to give women a seat at the table and encourage 30% of police officers nationally by 2030. And we're starting to see a lot of real interesting results at including a variety of folks at the table. So men and women, it's not one or, it's just strengthening. So I'm going to look into International Association of Women Police, Cheryl Ann. Thanks for that. I love when I get to talk with you and I get homework.
Yeah, there you go.
So
do you own any animals of your own?
Of course I do. When I left California, we had to sell our ranch, our horse, our goats, our bees, our chickens, all our little beings. But I have now 3 dogs, cat, and I could say that I've done some work with the U.S. Humane Society and really working on safeguarding animals. And
okay.
I mean, I'm going to sound like a fangirl, all of you, but I really believe that it reflects our society, how we treat our animals. And all of you that are in this space, I have abundant respect and admiration for you because it's gut-wrenching the work that you do, but it is absolutely necessary. And if in any way I've nudged you toward perhaps a practice that can keep you safe, keep you healthy, and build your resilience, and I am beyond delighted.
That's wonderful. Yeah, the big thing now is humane communities where we're all trying to understand how people get into a situation and be empathetic and compassionate for where they are, meet them where they are. Because just because someone is homeless doesn't mean that they're not a good dog or cat owner. Those kinds of things. So this kind of breathing sometimes and centering ourselves, maybe we can be more compassionate, more empathetic when, we center ourselves first.
Sure. And Jennifer, you bring up such a good point because all of that has consequence. If we don't learn to regulate, if we're not compassionate, and we safeguard our own hearts and our souls, it can often lead to some really difficult consequences of completely shutting off. And so it does strengthen the service. Jennifer, Michaela, Michaela, I have bifocals. Michaela asked if I speak to police departments. I do. And I speak at conferences. It's so different when we're in person, right? With a really different vibe. I feel very strongly about speaking to those of us that are in the uniformed service about how these practices strengthen us tactically and strengthen us as human beings and strengthen us emotionally. So I'm not good at saying no when people like you who are doing this service, cops, all of us that are out there in service in high stakes environments, ask, and I can contribute, I do. So definitely the team, Alexis knows how to get a hold of me.
And in a couple of days, you're going to have a lot of free time. So,
I don't know. So I've been serving this interim police chief gig for 5 months. And Friday, the permanent chief is sworn in, and I'm delighted beyond belief as I will go back to Arizona and continue driving forward on some of my passions and, serving, and the organization will be well served, onward and upward, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And Chris, I like your flag. What do you do? Oh, you're muted, Chris.
Okay, it wouldn't let me unmute there for a second. I am the director for Hardin County Animal Services in Savannah, Tennessee. We have animal control officers. I have a lot of law enforcement experience in the past. I did quite a few years with Memphis PD in the narcotics division before I came out here to small town Savannah.
Wow. Thanks for your service. That definitely, I'm sure, informs the way that you approach some folks.
It does. It makes you think otherwise outside of the normal animal box when you have both law enforcement and animal experience. So,
Sure. And Memphis is a place to really build your chops, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for your service. It's
thank you.
remarkable.
Okay. Any other questions? I guess not. There is someone in the chat that wanted, I guess, your contact information or something for her municipal PD.
So here I will put, now this is risky. I'm going to put my email, my personal email in the chat. And if there is a pathway to the Tactical Officers Association, to the Navy SEALs work, to University of Pennsylvania and the tactical space related to neuroscience, this work, to someone talked about compassion fatigue. Big deal. We're finding that a lot. If there's something that I can do to connect you with something that will serve you as a leader in this space, or serve the people that you serve, reach out to me. I don't have a lot of talent, but I have a big contact list for sure. Do I say all y'all?
Sometimes that's more
Is that
important.
Right? I used to say Rolodex, and youngsters like Chris would say, what the hell is that? So, again, I am just deeply grateful for you and for your work. It is tough, but you are warriors. I will never treat you with fragility. I will never treat you like you are fragile little beings, because you're badasses and you're in this space where you are doing legitimate, credible, meaningful work. So my email is in the chat, and I appreciate you and the work you do, and I hope you have a great night in Tennessee.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. We really appreciate your time and your talents and your information. And everybody, this will be recorded and we can see it again.
Oh, Lord.
We hope
Yes,
to see
I
you
know.
at future conferences for sure.
Yeah, thanks for
Yes,
the
let's
honor.
hope so.